Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into something totally mind-bending. It's one of the most complex, fascinating frameworks out there for understanding our very existence. It's called the Cognitive-Theoretic Model of the Universe, or the CTMU, developed by Chris Langan. What we're going to explore today is a model that essentially treats reality not just as physical matter, but like a vast, self-aware computer system. It is a wild look at how physics, consciousness, and theology might literally all intersect in one grand cosmic simulation. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the cosmic computer theory, move into God as the processor, and look at the mechanics of quantum consciousness. From there, we'll explore free will and creation, the physics of hell, and wrap up with the architecture of evil. Starting off with Section 1, the cosmic computer theory, the hardware and software of the universe. To really wrap our heads around this framework, you kind of have to look at the incredibly unique mind that engineered it. See that number, 195 to 210? That is the estimated IQ of Chris Langan. We're talking about a guy with an absolutely extraordinary intellect. And for him, the CTMU isn't just some casual thought experiment. It's a profoundly dense mathematical structure designed to explain the actual identity of reality, the nature of consciousness, and even theology. It's a true theory of everything built from the ground up to figure out what reality fundamentally is. Langan's core analogy basically suggests the universe acts like a highly sophisticated computer simulation, and it has two completely distinct parts. First, you have the display. This is the physical reality we actually see and experience around us. But importantly, it's made up of static states. Think of them like frozen frames in a movie reel or a paused video game. Second, you have the processor. Because those display states are static, something has to actually process them to make things change, move, and interact. That's your hidden, behind-the-scenes, dynamic processing power. According to Langan, you literally cannot describe reality or cause an effect without bringing both the static display and the dynamic processor together.
Moving to Section 2, God as the processor, the system administrator.
So if there's this vast processing system out there that requires massive computational power just to run the display of reality, well, Langan's framework logically deduces there has to be a central administrator. Which naturally leads us to ask, is God just the universe? I mean, is this entity simply the physical stuff we see out in space, or is it something entirely different? How exactly does the CTMU define the ultimate processor of reality? Well, the CTMU points to a concept called panentheism. Now, just to be clear, an ordinary pantheist assumes God is strictly confined to the physical universe, that God is just distributed over the things we can touch and see. But panentheism, as Langan explains it, means the physical universe cannot exist just by itself. It absolutely requires something greater. God includes the physical universe, for sure, but is vastly greater than it and not confined by it in any way.
The absolute crucial takeaway here is that God captures both the display and the processor. In this framework, God isn't just some abstract philosophical idea or a distant belief. This entity actively participates. It is the central force maintaining both the visual, static states we experience and the hidden processing functionality of the simulation. Basically, God provides the actual processing power that allows your physical state to exist and evolve from one moment to the next.
Which brings us to Section 3, Mechanics of Quantum Consciousness, the user interface. Okay, so if God is the central processor, how do our individual conscious minds fit into this giant computational network? Langan explains this using what he calls identity operators in quantum mechanics. You can think of these as tiny, self-aware processing units for reality that constantly run a three-step cycle. Step 1, they take input or recognize information from the outside world. Step 2, they process that input using very specific rules or syntax. And Step 3, they return it back to the world as a brand new external state. Our consciousness works entirely through this cycle, constantly processing and interacting with reality on a quantum level. Now, what's really wild about this quantum cycle is its implication. When Chris Langan was flat out asked if a literal table is conscious, his answer was a direct yes, generically conscious. No way, right? It's a pretty jarring claim. But in the CTMU, because these processing quanta exist everywhere, absolutely everything possesses some level of awareness. Obviously, human consciousness is incredibly complex, while a table has a very tertiary, basic level of quantum awareness. But the underlying mechanics of processing reality, those are universal.
All right, on to Section 4, free will and creation, generating the code.
So if everything is part of this massive mathematical simulation, and even tables have a form of generic consciousness, how does human choice actually exist? Langan draws a huge line in the sand here between a fixed manifold and a generative reality. A fixed manifold is that old-school idea of a predetermined universe, playing out strictly like a movie script where everything is already written and we're just along for the ride. The CTMU completely rejects this. Instead, it argues for a generative reality. Because quantum rules are probabilistic, everything is constantly being created and recreated via quantum fluctuations and our own active observation. We are generating reality in real time.
To explain exactly how we actively participate in that creation, Langan uses this brilliant analogy of a baby. When a baby is learning to see, it has to learn to distinguish the boundary of a glass from the table it sits on, right? By receiving visual cues, recognizing limits, and defining the external world, that baby isn't just passively watching a movie. By recognizing those boundaries, we are quite literally exercising free will to generate and define reality. Our observation is active participation.
Next up, Section 5, the physics of hell, edge cases and system errors.
If we are actively generating reality while we are alive, Langan's theory suggests that this quantum processing doesn't simply shut off when our physical hardware, our bodies, finally fail. So I have to ask you this deeply personal question. Where do you go when you die? In the CTMU, because consciousness persists, you move into what Langan calls the non-terminal domain. You don't just fade into oblivion, you persist. But exactly where you go depends entirely on your relationship to that ultimate processor we talked about earlier.
Let's trace how the CTMU actually maps out the mechanics of hell. And it's not framed as some traditional fiery pit of punishment, but really as a logical system error. Step 1. A person lives their life rejecting, hating, or denying the source of reality, so the main processor essentially cuts them off and turns away. Step 2. Because that person's consciousness still desperately wants to exist, it tries to create and process its own reality without the main server. And Step 3. Because this person is completely disconnected from the perfect source, their own internal corrupted state manifests outwardly as a hellish alternative reality. So in this model, hell is fundamentally a self-created isolation. And finally, Section 6, the architecture of evil, system viruses. Now, if hell is just a logical consequence for individuals disconnecting, how does this framework account for organized evil? Big entities like Satan in the broader system. To explain this, the CTMU introduces a really unique concept called secondary tors. Since God represents absolute perfection and perfect boundaries, an antithesis has to exist, what we would commonly call Satan or anti-God. But here's the catch. According to Langan, Satan is inherently incoherent and lacks any real power on his own, simply because he hates existence. Therefore, to operate at all, evil absolutely requires secondary tors. These are human structures, things like corporations, governments, or organizations that can be exploited and hijacked to nucleate power and give evil a functioning skeleton in the real world. And this brilliantly illustrates the structural difference between good and evil in this cosmic computer. Just look at the contrast. On one side, you have God, the processor, who possesses perfect boundaries, is entirely complete in himself, and acts as the ultimate source of all reality. On the flip side, you have Satan, the antithesis, who is completely incoherent alone, hates existence, and is fundamentally parasitic. He relies entirely on human structures and systems to function and cause harm. Evil, in this framework, is basically a systemic virus that needs our hardware to run. As we wrap up this explainer on Chris Langan's incredible CTMU, I really want to leave you with this one provocative thought. If reality truly is a self-aware simulation, and you are constantly acting as a quantum processing unit, what role are your choices playing in generating its boundaries today? Are you connecting to the ultimate processor, or are you building your own isolated reality? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.